I'm Mel Wachowiak. I'm a senior conservator at Smithsonian Institution's Museum Conservation Institute, and I've been helped for the last few years in a lot of the imaging projects that we have by a number of people, and currently Keats Webb is one of those. She's a contract imaging specialist with me. I want to get to this idea of fit for purpose. You probably heard this before, but it's the concept often escapes us as we get increasingly expensive and increasingly more powerful tools. We often apply or over-apply a technique, a technology, a tool to a situation that does not demand it. But sometimes it works the other way around. Sometimes we have a question for which there is no technology. It's not held within our resources and we need to get extra help, or we need to wait for something else to come along. Some of the things that I'll touch on, including the RTI, which Carla just presented, will be 3D scanning, gigapixel imaging, high dynamic range imaging, microscopy and 3D mapping. Among the set of tools that we have, which are not scale dependent, which borrow heavily from other commercial applications, such as terrestrial mapping, sort of Google map way to think about an object. Objects are their own worlds, and we can orbit with our own satellites and collect data. So the scale, again, is not really the issue. It's having the right fit for purpose. I won't get into some of the other techniques, but know that this is just a few of what we're fortunate to have and are wrestling with in some cases, such as hyper and multispectral imaging, where we're actually doing spectroscopy and collecting at 10 nanometer wavelengths. And the overlap in technologies can include mapping as sort of a X, Y, Z, and then some. I'll call it n-dimensional. We can include time in there, wavelengths of light, and many other factors. And because of the nature of computational imaging, we can pull these all together in one place. We don't have to be stuck with the way things were done. The last thing that I didn't mention, an example of a daguerreotype here in two images, high dynamic range imaging. This is where I work, the Smithsonian Institution. That was my first ID badge. I escaped or graduated from art school and have been working in conservation since 1979 at the Smithsonian since 1989. There literally were buffaloes roaming, but not really while I was there. The mission, you may have heard of the Smithsonian, but I always try to give the audience credit that you may not have too. We are, in fact, the national museum system made up of 19 museums, 137 million objects, blah, 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 blah. It's just really big. It's just a lot of stuff. We have collections that were part of expeditions in the middle 19th century where people were sent out to collect. We have what we call orphan collections, which is some branch of the government, commerce, or somebody said, we have all this stuff and we're not going to keep it, so we'll give it to you. So we get stuck with a lot of stuff too, but it's part of the enormous gift that we have in our work, that we get to deal with such a broad range of collections. As you may know, the will of James Smithson, which established the funding for the institution, says that we should work for the increase and diffusion of knowledge, and that isn't to become increasingly diffuse. So I'll get back on track. I put in another definition of computational imaging, which you've probably already read, but the idea, as Carla said that, we have this convergence of photography, a long-established practice, and now digital photography, and all the image processing and computer graphics coming in makes virtually whatever you imagine is possible now. But what we imagine and what we need to do are two different things. I work in suburban Maryland. There's a satellite flyover of the complex that I work in, the Museum Support Center in Suitland, Maryland. It's each one of those little sawtooth structures is about the size of a football field, 3 stories high, and we have a considerable amount of the collections in the building. The complex to the left there is a number of buildings, also storage and aircraft conservation. This is a huge undertaking, and this is just a small part of the Smithsonian. I forgot to point out my high-tech gear. That was an early device that I received. All conservators have the Optivisor, just a rite of passage. The first technique I'll talk about is 3D scanning. I see Hugh Shockey in the back there, conservator at the American Art Museum, and he was one of the instigators of this project to replace a lost sculpture from Central Park. This sculpture was by Paul Manship, and Sam, as we affectionately call the American Art Museum, was one of, I think there were only 2, right? How many castings were made?
I don't remember, but I do know we get the rights to pull in the Manship stuff because it's a long time ago.
The lost sculpture from Central Park was the same group of the 3 deer. And the problem or question before us was, can we replicate this without doing traditional mold making, which has been shown to have sometimes disastrous results for objects. The 3D scanning that I'm going to talk about is using structured light, but there's also laser-based systems, photogrammetry that Carl had touched on. There's long range and short range and medium range scanning. You can scan the moon from Earth. Again, the idea is it's not dependent on scale. The work was done on site at SAM. This is our scanner. It's basically a triangulation system. You may already be familiar with it. How many of you seen or heard anything about scanning? A few? Yeah, okay. So not everyone, but the idea is that you project the pattern on the surface of the object, and any deviation from a perfect pattern is computed as a deformation in that pattern to which numbers can be applied. So you get the volume, you get the surface. You don't know anything about structure. You get a shell. You get a dimensionless point in space.